Previously on the Fan of History, in 911 BC, the Neo-Assyrian Empire rose to reclaim the territory lost to them. In 890 BC, their second king, Tukulti-Ninurta, for the third time brings the Assyrian army to the Babylonian border. In 892 BC, King Shao usurped his nephew King Yi to become king of Su China. Welcome to the Fan of History. I'm the Fan of History, and we are going to talk about what happened in the 880s BC. My disclaimer is that I'm just a fan of history, not an historian. I would like you to watch the videos The Great Civilizations of the World in 900 BC and the events of the 890s BC before you watch this. We have a lot of material about the 880s BC, and I decided to split it into two parters. This is part 1 of 880s BC. So how much detail do you really want? Let me know in the comments, because we will get more and more details as we approach 500 BC. And I'm happy to share as much detail as you want, but maybe I'm giving you too much. So this two-parter thing is an experiment. Let me know what you think about it. So Tukulti-Ninurta II is Assur's chosen king. And he will do yearly campaigns with the Assyrian army to honor Assur, god of war, who you can see in the picture here. Isn't he adorable? Tukulti-Ninurta has a defensive focus. His father, Adad-nirari II, conquered no area and made new states pay tribute to the Assyrians. And Tukulti-Ninurta's main focus is that things will keep on going. But it goes a little bit further than his father every time, just to claim more victories. He doesn't have to battle in the eastern Jazeera grasslands at all. It seems that his father conquered the area. So Tukulti-Ninurta's main target will be Nairi, that is today's Armenia, to the north from Assyria, close to Lake Van. And Tukulti-Ninurta is about to invent something that will revolutionize warfare for all time, at least until the 1940s. We have the royal records. We don't have any non-Assyrian sources at this time. The goal of the Assyrian campaign is still to restore the Middle Assyrian Empire of Tiglath-Pileser I. There will be a special video on the early Neo-Assyrian army. But now Tukulti-Ninurta is standing at the border of Babylonia with his army. Once they have won against Babylon, and once they have lost against their current king. So what happens now, the third time? Well, there is two royal marriages. Tukulti-Ninurta II and Nabu-Shuma-Ukin I of Babylon decide to marry each other's daughters to have an alliance. One important thing, this alliance will actually last quite a while, and it's very unexpected. A word about ancient agreements then. When you make an agreement, a peace, even an alliance in ancient times, it's always between people and not between states. So when the king dies, the alliance needs to be renewed, because the old alliance was only between the kings and not between the states. And that will be interesting, to say the least, and it's hard for the modern mind to get around. There are uncertainties about these marriages, and it might have been Adad-nirari II that actually accomplished this. But I took some liberties here in the story. There is a royal marriage, two royal marriages, and there's peace between Babylon and Assyria at this time. So, Tukulti-Ninurta has now pacified the Armenians, and he has peace with Babylon, so he can go north. These campaigns are poorly documented, but he fights the Nairi, which is a loose confederation of tribes. The kingdom of Urartu does not yet exist. And to even be more confusing, the kingdom of Urartu will never be named such, because that's the Assyrian name for it. But there are still some years left before it appears around Lake Van. So this is the area of Armenia in the 880s BC. In India, we have problems dating stuff. We know that Kuru and Panchala are Vedic kingdoms in the north. There is still no literacy, sadly. In 888 BC, there is a new king in Babylon. Nabu-Shuma-Ukin dies, and his son, Nabu-Apli-Adina, becomes the king of Babylon. He is depicted to the right on this picture, and there's also a change in fashion. And because his strange hat, you see here, replaces the feathered crown of Babylon. And that's not the only change we're gonna see here, because there will be a cultural revival for Babylon. And if you look at Babylon alone, you will see it come out of the Dark Age under the rule of Nabu-Apli-Adina, who will rule Babylon for 33 years. He confirms this alliance with Assyria. So there is still peace between Assyria and Babylon. In Egypt, Osirkon I finally dies in 887 BC. He is the second pharaoh of the 22nd dynasty. He was not as great as his father Shoshenq, but he was still great, and he ruled Egypt for a very peaceful long time. And now, with his death, things will quickly go downhill for the 22nd dynasty of Egypt. Egypt will soon be divided again, but it will be worse than it was during the 21st dynasty. Osirkon, this extremely rich pharaoh, probably one of the richest pharaohs after the New Kingdom, his tomb has never been found, and it is probably really rich. The riches in Osirkon's tomb will probably dwarf the riches in Tutankhamun's. The succession of Osirkon is extremely unclear, and here is the first detail I cut. I don't want to do 10 slides on these 2 years of Egypt. So Manetho, he is an Egyptian historian very late in the Hellenized period, who will create the system of the dynasties. And we'll talk much more about Manetho later, but he has 3 kings ruling before Takelot I. Osirkon's son, Takelot I, will be the only pharaoh in 885 BC. So let's go with that. In 886 BC, there is a rebellion in Su, China. King Shao, the new king, has gone too far. And the nobles of China rise up against King Shao. We don't know what happened to his half-brother Sheng, who was mentioned in the last show. But the many lords restore King Yi's son, confusedly named King Yi, as king of China. We do not know what happens to King Shao, and he ruled China for 5 years as the evil uncle that usurped the kingdom. But now power goes back to King Yi, and King Yi will turn out to be quite a weak king. In 886 BC, Tukulti-Ninurta goes to war. And you see the pattern, the Assyrian king always goes to war. Every year, if he can. This is the last of the recorded campaigns of Tukulti-Ninurta against the Nairi. And we know a bit more about this one. Probably because this was the successful campaign that all the others had prepared for. The Bit Samani tribe, they are Arameans. They live at the source of the Tigris, at the border to the mountains to the north. And their ruler, Amebal, because there are several Amebals, is bound by oath to Tukulti-Ninurta. And this is further than Adad-nirari II had gone on his campaign. So, and this is done quite early in the year. Amebal succumbs, gives up, pays tribute, takes the oath, and there's still time left in the year. So Tukulti-Ninurta goes up the Greater Sab River into what is today Iran, invades the Zagros Mountains. Because there are mountain tribes there. There are also several small kingdoms that we'll talk more about later. But this trouble is by the mountain people. And the mountain tribes includes tribes like the Persian and the Medes. And they have been stealing horses from the steppe people. And they have horses, and Tukulti-Ninurta needs horses. The Assyrian army has been using chariots since 2000 BC, or even earlier, like most armies in the Middle East. But Tukulti-Ninurta does not need his horses for chariots, because in this year, or somewhere very close to here, some Assyrian king, probably Tukulti-Ninurta II, invents cavalry. let that sink in for a second. This is the start of cavalry warfare in the world. What probably happened is that he went up into the mountains with his chariots, found that the chariots could not, they didn't work in the mountains because they were too steep. So they had to cut the horses loose and try to imitate what the Persian and Medes and the other tribes, because they are not the most powerful tribes even in the Zagros Mountains at this time, and what they were doing. And cavalry was known from the steppes. It is extremely hard to ride a horse, and that is why chariots have been so used before, because you don't have a saddle, you don't have stirrups, you don't have anything. You have to cling to the horse with your thigh muscles, and this is extremely hard to do. You have to train your entire life basically to do this. So the way Tukulti-Ninurta does it is that he has two people riding next to each other, with one guy controlling both horses and the other guy firing arrows. So you have a team of two riders, one firing arrows, one sort of driving the horses. I will talk a lot more about this in the early Neo-Assyrian army video, because this is a very, very important invention, and we will find that the use of cavalry is so revolutionary that it will help the Assyrians a lot in future battles. In 885 BC, Tukulti-Ninurta goes to war again. He goes on a tour pretty much all around the place, pretty much to all the areas where Assyria has conquered so far. It is mostly against the Aramean tribes. He's very close to the Babylonian border, and even though they're allied, the Babylonians get a little bit worried. We have found 2 inscriptions from this campaign, and nobody dares oppose Tukulti-Ninurta, so there's no fighting. They just give up, pay tribute. So, oh no, mighty Assyrian king, please take our gold. We swear fealty to you. This is the first time the Assyrians claim a hostile action for reason for war. This is what the Romans will be doing every time they go to war, but the Assyrians sometimes care about to mention a reason to go to war. But the Assyrian Empire does not need a reason to go to war. The Assyrian Empire has to go to war every year. Tukulti-Ninurta II lives part-time in Nineveh and part-time in Ashur, and he is not happy with having the capital in Ashur because he's too far from the northern frontier. It takes him a long time to get the army to the north, and maybe, just maybe, he's complaining to his extremely powerful warrior son, Ashur-Nasir-Pal, about this fact that the capital is in the wrong place. In 885 BC, Takelot I rules Egypt. He will rule Egypt for 13 years, and he will run into problems, not only with Thebes, but problems with a lot of things. His reign is not well documented, and yeah, we'll talk more about Takelot, but not too much, because we don't know a whole lot about him. This is the only thing we have of him, his sarcophagus, so we don't have an image of him even. And that is kind of an indication that things are going bad in Egypt. In 884 BC, Omri founds the Kingdom of Israel. Suddenly, the Old Testament kicks in and we can start to use it as an historical source. The Assyrians consider Omri to be the founder of Israel, and they will actually not talk about Israel, they will just talk about the house of Omri. Judah is still not around, it seems. There are no archaeological finds indicating that Judah is a kingdom at all at this time. And archaeology is also why we consider Omri real, while David and Solomon are probably mythological figures. There is a stele, a stone raised up in Moab that mentions Omri. There's also the black obelisk of Shalmaneser III. That's an Assyrian source, and I will probably make a video about the black obelisk, but we are not there yet. But the black obelisk does mention Omri. And some researchers don't even think that Omri is real, but want to place his son Ahab as the first real king of Israel. But I'm convinced I will go with Omri as the first ruler of Israel. Israel's capital is at Tirzah, Ever heard of that? I hadn't. Tirzah is a poor location for capital. It is hard to defend, and Omri is already considering moving it. We will talk more about why ancient history discredits Omri and who actually does this. I think I have a clue about who invents the earlier kings of Israel to discredit Omri, because Omri is a polytheist, and the faith of Yahweh, the monotheism that will later become the Jewish faith, is around, and a lot of people don't like the fact that Israel is being ruled by someone who is a polytheist. We will find that Omri has close connections to the Phoenicians. Talk more about that later. In Mexico, the Olmecs are still going strong. You thought that the Olmec were weakened by the loss of San Lorenzo, but they weren't. They're actually going into their strongest, the best time ever. They will have the high point of the Olmec civilization. It's now based, the main ceremonial center is in Levant, and they produce some fantastic art from this period. So let's look at some art from the Olmecs. They're mostly made of jade, clay, basalt and greenstone, and some of these materials cannot be found in Mexico. So they have an extensive trade network, and they import these materials. Their style is surprisingly naturalistic. To the upper right you have the wrestler, roughly from this period. They also begin building the gigantic heads. I've already talked about them. They are the one you see here is from maybe even earlier than this period. They are thought to represent kings. This head is larger than a person. And I will talk more about Olmec art. There's a jade mask to the lower right, also roughly from this period. Lower left, also roughly from this period. So the Olmecs are great artists. In Europe, things are starting to happening. The Villanovans, we talked about them last time. Greece is still in the Dark Age. I will soon release a video about the Greeks and what they are up to in the first half of the 9th century. This is very, very early for the Greeks. But it's not as early for the Phoenicians, who have their golden age, and they have founded their first colony. The earliest colony I found in the Mediterranean. Soon the colony race will be on. But the first colony is this one. The map is from 500 BC, so... Oh, that was another map. Sorry, this map is much more modern. But Huelva, this... Oh, God. I changed the map. Huelva, over here, is... they found Phoenician pottery in 1997, and it's still ongoing, I think. I'll link you to a paper about it. But this seems to be the oldest Phoenician colony. And you could argue that it's not a colony at this point, but there's a lot of Phoenician pottery. And there is some Villanovan stuff. There is some Greek stuff already here in Huelva at this time. There is a possible connection to the city of Tyre on the Phoenician coast. And there are also ties to Cyprus, but Cyprus also has ties to Tyre. And I think I like to believe the ties to Tyre, because that will explain the later connection between Carthage and Huelva and the Spanish colonies, New Carthage, etc. We'll talk about that later. So next time we are going to do part 2 of the 880s, and there the Neo-Assyrian Empire will level up when Ashur-Nasir-Pal II becomes the chosen king of Ashur. Ashur-Nasir-Pal will be known as the Lord of Massacres in this course, and we'll talk about that later. I will release this show on June the 9th. You can discuss the show with me on YouTube or on Facebook. Please like, subscribe and stuff. That helps to keep me going. But for the next few episodes, I will be so excited about Ashur-Nasir-Pal II that I will just keep going no matter what, even if nobody watches this. And I am already into making a special episode about the year 879. So 1 episode for a full year. Thank you for watching. The Fan of History.